I have a feeling that we're going to do a little bit of backtracking too. My goodness, we had Exodus 12 yesterday, and just there's so much stuff crammed in there. We're talking about Passover, talking about the Exodus, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and today we're talking about the consecration of the firstborn. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, and then already you get the pillars of cloud and fire. So we've already actually got questions coming in before we even started today. So I'm feeling that we're going to just, a lot of connecting the pieces. But I mean, it's fine and it's good because, like we've been saying, this is just, I mean, this is the key moment, really, of the Pentateuch, of the first 5 books of the Bible. It's this. I mean, this is the thing that, like we were saying last time, it ends up expanded as our Christian celebration of Easter. I mean, this is the heart of the thing right here, already prefigured in the Old Testament. Good stuff that we're looking at. Really, really fun story, just good on all counts. And joining us today, we've got Pastor Dave Andrus, pastor at Abiding Savior in St. Louis, Missouri, also heading up Not Alone Ministries. Good morning, brother. It's been a little while. Glad to have you on, and I hope that you and all the brothers and sisters out there with you are doing well. Amen, amen. And well, yeah, it's in some. It was interesting the other day. Someone was telling me how some of the youth were just having a lot of questions about the Bible because it was like, hey, all these crazy things are happening, and is that like the Bible? Like where it talks about like Revelation and like the plagues and stuff. And so it's really been interesting how timely it's been to go over these things. And I think what it shows you really is that the things that we're going through these days are, not to take this the wrong way, because these things are bad and they're serious, but I guess the way to put it is like they aren't abnormal. They aren't shocking in the way of what this is never supposed to happen. Like, well, on one level, yeah, these bad things, none of them are supposed to happen, but in the fallen world, this is what it's like, and this is what it was like then when the people of Israel were oppressed by Egypt. That's right. Yeah, certainly. It's all like we were saying, just pointing the way, foreshadowing. This is there's a lot of good connections to make, and so without any further ado, let's start making them. As we start, would you open us up, brother, with a prayer? Amen. All right, so we're going to go ahead and read the chapter straight through before coming and looking at things in detail. And we'll want to come back and talk about the consecration of the firstborn. I think that's especially the thing that we didn't have a chance last time to really talk about much at all. But of course, we have the actual Passover event itself and the striking down of the firstborn. That's still very much ringing in our ears here. But what else should we be keeping in mind or keeping in ear open for as we read Exodus chapter 13? Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and that last part there, connecting us to that big theme, right? That you may tell, that you may know, that all may know, right? Like that's again and again and again, right? And you see that in a really cool way, actually, here in chapter 13, particularly. But enough talking about it. Let's just read the actual thing here. So here's Exodus chapter 13 here in the English Standard Version. The Lord said to Moses, "Consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine." Then Moses said to the people, "Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of slavery, for by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread shall be eaten. Today in the month of Abib you are going. The Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites, to your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. You shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. And on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and to your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of a man among your sons you shall redeem. And when in time to come your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand or frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt." When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near, for God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the sea, toward the Red Sea. And when the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle, Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. So it's interesting. It's a lot of things going on, and we have it again where it seems like it's a chapter where there's a lot of instructions, and then there's also movement, and so to us it's just sort of like, well, why is this like all on the same chapter? But it's just kind of like, can't we just kind of like all the instructions, then all the that'd be more logical. But I think what it highlights for me, and something I didn't really appreciate for a while, is that all of this stuff is happening on the move. There is no, okay, now hang on, we're not going to do our travel quite yet. Let's take care of this stuff, and then we'll go. No, and neither is it like, okay, we're going to go, and then we'll figure out all that ceremonial stuff, right? Let's be practical. No, it just constantly happens. It's just enmeshed in the realities, and even though it's crazy, right? And it's like, hey, we're just packing up all of our belongings and worldly possessions and leaving and going to this unknown place, right? We're still going to worship God along the way. We're still going to be teaching our children, and what a beautiful thing in this chapter, catechizing our children. So it's just amazing how they go from place to place to place, but the worship of God goes with them every step of the way. Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah. Well, it's like I said, it's something that like I really had neglected, and it's something that it is maybe a little bit obscured, or at least it's not really highlighted in the translation. But when and we've seen this kind of thing happen before, but when you have there it is. I think it's in verse 17, right? Like when Pharaoh let the people go, right? It sounds like maybe verse 17 and onward is kind of like one big parentheses comment, like it's just kind of, by the way, this is what had happened, right? But what seems to be going on in the Hebrew text is, they celebrate the Passover, right? Like wearing their belts, like like staves in hand, right? Like ready to go, because they have very little time to get out of the country, and so it's like they're ready to go. They celebrate the Passover. They get out of town. And they make it to Sukkoth, right? And that's what it says there, like in verse, where was it? Like around about 20 or so-ish, is where it mentions that they move on from Sukkoth. So they make it to Sukkoth, and then it seems there they have the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and then from there, they're going to, and the goal is that then when they get to Canaan, they'll be doing the consecration of the firstborn. And so like this idea that it's like, hey, I've got something for you guys to be doing every step of the way. It's there, but yeah, I know it's just so easy to overlook, because I think we have so tied together the Feast of Unleavened Bread and Passover, like it's the same thing. We just kind of would just sort of naturally assume that it all happened at once, but they didn't have after God struck down the Egyptians. They didn't have a 7-day festival of unleavened bread. It was like that night they had the Passover meal and then they got out of there. So, clearly it didn't happen all at the same time. It was in phases. But yeah. Well, or go this far and do this, and then go that far and then do this, right? Something for every step along the way. So, okay, so let's go ahead then and come back around here and talk about the beginning part of the chapter. So in chapter 1, we have God speaking to Moses again. And it is kind of interesting how it does just come up, because it does come up as just, and then it's the next thing that he says. And so this immediately follows then, I mean, what it follows is the practice of Passover, and you get more instructions on how they're going to do the Feast of Unleavened Bread, right? Which makes sense, that they're being instructed kind of on the way, like, hey, when we get there, so what you're going to do. So we're not, no one's like, okay, we're here, now what? But so that is interesting that it's just immediately following on the heels of this. And maybe this is a good time just to go ahead and take the question that we got before we actually even began today. So because speaking of on the move, so this is all following now the striking down of the firstborn, and I mean what we're going towards, right, is the Red Sea crossing. So in this itinerary, right, like, what are we to be understanding about where exactly they are? And this kind of goes back to this thing about, it's called the Red Sea, but I think it's become more and more. I think it's become more and more widely known that people sometimes refer to this increasingly as Yam Suf, or the Sea of Reeds. And so people are asking, this is the question, like, hey, can you clarify what this is? Like, is it the Red Sea or is it the Reed Sea? Does it matter? Does that help us to determine where all this is going on? Like where are they in all of this? Sure, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, nice segue. Well, okay. I think I broadly agree that you don't want to be getting bogged down in the details, insofar as, and this is something that I'm guilty of all the time, that I can just go, just super focused and intense about the details, but I can do that in a way that I am kind of excusing myself from the bigger point, and kind of almost like distracting from what's essential, right? And so it's like, I've done something wrong, and instead of just admitting I've done wrong, I'm going to like say, well, I mean, is it really fair that you would say this? Because doesn't that mean that, and then it's like, okay, then I win the argument, and whoever I'm talking to, distraction of the fact that, like, whatever, I had the details right, but like I was still in the wrong, right? And so that's something that I'm guilty of too often. I need to confess, and that's something I think that we all do sometimes. That we kind of retreat into the details when we're scared of the big point, the big picture, right? And so that is fair. However, we also do not want to miss the details here, because all the details wrong, we won't see the big picture. You gotta have the dots to connect so that the picture emerges, right? Those little connect the dot things, like, I always got those, like when they handed them out at church, right, for the kids, connect the dots. Well, if you don't, no, as a kid. And I'm hard on my kids. I won't even let them do that. Well, I mean, sometimes, but usually I'm like, Ellie, pay attention. Say, Lord, have mercy. But I mean, a little bit of that's fine. A little bit of that's fine, okay? But just maybe not the whole time during church. But so, but you got to have those dots there, right? Or else, what's the kid going to do? Just draw whatever, right? So we got to have the details to kind of keep us tethered down and actually reading the Bible. But we, like you're saying, we don't want to like get so caught up in the details that we just kind of like retreat from the big point. So thinking about the details as it relates to the big point, I think that a big contrasting motif here is the wilderness and the land of Egypt. We got Moses running away from Egypt into the wilderness, right? That's where he encounters God. God says, hey, you're going to worship me on this mountain there in the wilderness. He goes back to Egypt, right? They're leaving Egypt to go back to the wilderness. And then in chapter 14, we're going to get this little bit here where he says, hey, we're going to turn back and we're going to go encamp in front of Pi Hahiroth between Migdol and the sea, right? So there's this idea of, hey, we're not actually going to go all this way in the wilderness because of what we just read today, right? That there's going to be this problematic little obstacle called the Philistines. Like, let's not go there. And so they turn back, so the point, right? I mean, wherever exactly they are, because I'll confess, I don't know exactly where all these points are. Big idea though is, hey, we're already showing we're trying to go out into the wilderness to worship God. Is that not exactly what Moses was asking for? Right? He was saying, he didn't say, free the slaves, like you bad Pharaoh. He said, no, allow the sons of Israel to go into the wilderness to worship God. Like for a time, like dismiss us, give us leave to do this, right? And so that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they do. Like, yeah. Yeah. So there is, I mean, it's just actually, there, and also this is important too, right? Because, I mean, what does actually Moses say, right? When Pharaoh, this is going back into the plague narrative, when can't you just worship God here? Why is it got to be in a certain place? And he says, if we worship God here, it's an abomination to the Egyptians, which is sort of his polite way of saying, you guys are an abomination to God. And we're not going to worship God, our true God, in the midst of your, Egyptian polytheism. I mean, this would be like trying to hold our church service in the middle of, this Buddhist shrine or this, this mosque or something like that. It's going to confuse people. There's going to be problems. And so they truly do go out into the wilderness to Sukkoth to have this feast of unleavened bread. Right, this festival to the Lord, just like they've been asking for the whole time with Pharaoh. Then they turn back towards Egypt. And so this then, I think, is a big point. Because when they're here now, kind of back in the land of Egypt, what's coming up for the Red Sea, there's going to be one final wonder or plague in the land of Egypt. And so often we count to 10 and we stop. But this last Red Sea event is actually part of the sequence. It is actually the last big one. And so it's number 12 when you go from the snake at the beginning to the Red Sea at the end. 12 being a number that actually fits a Hebrew sensibility of what's important a little bit more closely than 10. So the big thing is, right, God's going to do one more big thing, not just in the eyes of the people, but in the eyes of Pharaoh. So where exactly this sea of reeds is, and yeah, it's true, literally, it does not say the color red, it says reeds, right? But, I mean, I don't know what that means, really, truthfully, like in terms of where on the map. But wherever it is, it's in the eyes of Egypt. It's another thing that God does in Egypt because the point is God is, as you were pointing to the Great Commission, is doing this in the sight of all, not just a select few. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, and yeah, trying to keep the sequence in mind. I think like you're saying, like to make sure we're using the details to help us see the big picture. That's what we want to do, right? But we got to take a break here already. Just time flies. But everybody, hang on. We're looking at Exodus chapter 13 here on Thy Strong Word. Be right back. Okay, so a little bit more perhaps here on this. So the Red Sea, right? Like this is that's a name. Like if you look at your map, like today, right? You can see that there's a thing on your map that says the Red Sea. And I think that, I mean, there's of course a million other names that it's also given, but it's like an inlet of the Indian Ocean. It's between the Arabian Peninsula and Africa. So I mean, like you can talk about this geographical thing, and it's called the Red Sea. And I think that like in certain languages, it actually does mean like red there. So I think that's a little bit of the thing. It's that like the thought was there was this early identification that they were talking about that place, and so they called it that. But the text doesn't actually say the Red Sea. I mean, this was written a long time ago, and the word in Hebrew is suf, yam of sea, and then it says yam of suf, reed, the Reed Sea. So and the thing is, it could be anywhere. I mean, it could be like any body of water that had reeds in it. It doesn't even have to be a Galilee, that's a lake, right? So it could be like really any body of water that had reeds in Egypt. Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. I'm Pastor AJ Espinosa. We're looking at Exodus chapter 13, though. We're connecting the dots on a lot of things. These chapters are they're just so interconnected. We were just talking about the Red Sea versus the Reed Sea. We were just talking here with our Dave Andrus, pastor Lutheran and St. also heading up Not Alone Ministries. We were just talking about, it can be hard to say exactly, okay, this is where, the Red Sea or the Reed Sea is, right? But wherever it is, the details in the text are saying, hey, look, the point is that they followed up on what was said. They went out into the wilderness to worship God, and they held the Feast of Unleavened Bread. They went back into Egypt, and so wherever this Reed Sea is, it's in Egypt. Point being, it's in the sight of the Egyptians. It's going to be one more judgment on their gods, which I'm hoping we'll talk a lot about next time, actually, because it is amazing when you think about the Red Sea event or the Reed Sea event and what that does mean as an anti-Egyptian image. Something that they would see and understand and say, oh man, there really is no God except the God of the Hebrews. So a lot of good things today, and thank you for the question, though. If you've got any more questions, please do go ahead, call in 1-800-730-2727, or if you're in St. Louis, 314-821-0850. You can also send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org, or just hop on the live stream, facebook.com/AJ Espinosa. Just put your comments or questions right there in the live stream box. I want to thank our underwriters at the Lutheran Heritage Foundation, lhfmissions.org. Thank you for underwriting Thy Strong Word. So we were just talking about that, and so we have this sense, so wherever exactly it is, it's in Egypt because there's going to be this manifestation of glory, God showing himself, and that's where we're going. We're going to talk about the catechesis, and I want to talk about that. It's so that they may know, so your sons may know. But before we get there, we got these two little lines here, these two little verses. Consecrate to me all the firstborn. Right, there's the command, and the command's just put right there. But this isn't going to happen for like some time, though. So like, what do you make of that in the sequencing here? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's well said, and you just made the connection there, right? I mean, so it literally here, it has this word for consecration, which means set apart. I mean, it's the word for holy right here, right? We have consecrate. You got that sacred idea root there, right? Which means to set apart as special, unique, as belonging to God, reserved, right? That sort of idea. And the thing is, the connection is made here because, just like we're about to see, it's so that when the children ask, and you're teaching them, doing this question and answer, and you use Luther's question, what does this mean? Oh, hey, look at that. It's not actually Luther's question. It was Moses' question, God's question. Right? Hey, that's a good thing. Yeah. But so like when you do this later, because it's not going to happen until it's like time for them to go into the promised land, but you're going to make the connection now. This is why you're doing it. You're setting aside your sons because, you know what? I set them aside when I passed over them. I mean, isn't that the language we actually saw back in the description of the plague of the firstborn, right? I mean, it was really interesting. So like, I'm trying to think like where the word was. We talked about the connection of Passover to that Pesach word that refers to Pascha or Pascha, and ultimately even Easter. But the word is sort of like leave alone, set aside, go past, right? So that idea is already there actually in the passing over. So you can see that there he's going. The picture, it's really interesting. This is back to chapter 12, verse 23. The Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians, and when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you, right? So it's like there's this idea of, it's almost like the destroyer is following God through the city, throughout the city and throughout the land of Egypt. And then it's like they go door to door. And if God pauses at the door and looks at the destroyer goes in. But if he just keeps on walking, destroyer isn't allowed to. I mean, he's setting aside like each one. I mean, it's really. I mean, there's this image, right? So there it is. Why do we consecrate our firstborn? Because that's what God did. Yeah. Right. That's right. That's right. Well, I mean, because like you were saying, it's not merely that God set aside and passed over, right, the firstborn of Israel, but there's this sense where the firstborn of Egypt were put forward, right? And so, well, not really so much that the firstborn of Egypt were put forward. I mean, they were kind of in place. It's somewhere the lambs were put forward, right? Because isn't it interesting that they actually took, you take this lamb. I remember someone telling me about the being in Israel around Passover time and how like all like the stairways in like the apartment buildings, the stairways are just like there's blood everywhere in the stairways because people are like sacrificing these lambs and then like bringing them up to to do the Passover, right? But I mean, so isn't that interesting, right? Like you have this picture, like everyone sacrifices their lambs, and then you bring out the lamb, and you put the blood, you put it up there out in front. There's this putting it out there, putting it forward, right? To be seen, to be seen, right? There's overarching, themes of Exodus, right? So in the same way, what's God going to do? Well, if he's going to set us aside as holy, right? I mean, that's the consecration idea. If he's going to set aside his people as holy, he's got to put forward some blood to be seen. And so that's what he is with his son. So these are all the details that you were saying that help us understand exactly, right? It's actually what prepares us so we can understand what happened with our Lord Jesus Christ, that he was put forward, the idea of propitiation, right? Putting his blood forward, that the destroyer would not enter the house of faith, but would pass over it because God has consecrated it. Yeah. 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 100%. Yeah. 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 That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Like it's so important. The ritual, it is important. It is that way of staying connected to it and participating in it without, like you were saying, it just becoming ice cream every day, right? And we just lose all the significance of it, right? I mean, it's honestly, it's one of the comparisons that Paul makes, right, is that these moments, right, like the Passover or like Easter, they're like weddings, right? And a wedding is a super special event. Why? Well, because it happens once in a lifetime is the intention of God, right? That's the design. However, right, there are rituals, you might say, associated with marriage that should happen all the time. Frequently. And that's a way of staying in and living in that covenant and in a sense even renewing it, right? That's very good. But it would be messed up if we just had the wedding every day or every week or every month, because the wedding would like you were saying, just start to lose all significance. So right. So, this is what we have going on in the Eucharist, or really in the celebration of Passover. The Passover happened once, but it was observed every year. Easter happened once, and we observe it actually every week. When we do the divine service, right, and especially the celebration of the Eucharist is the idea. But so that's well said. And then also just to your point, the one that I had heard recently, it was one of my pastors who taught me this one. He said, in terms of like the kind of like no better way to do than to learn than to teach, right? The steps are like this between the teacher and the student. First, I do, you watch. Then you do and I teach, and then you teach and I watch. Right. So like this idea of the way to move the student along to fully learning something is to get them to the point where they're teaching it. And I'll say, I never knew the catechism better than when I had to teach it to 8th graders. And so, if anyone from Salem Lutheran Church in Afton, Missouri is listening, thank you guys for helping me learn the catechism better. And now I'm going through the same thing, actually learning it in Spanish now with my daughters, and it's just like I don't know if I was going to do that or nearly do it as well if not for, teaching. So, let's talk a little bit more though about this teaching and the content of it, right? It's really fascinating the way that it's talked about here. Remember this day, that we're connecting all the dots, all 3 of these observances, Passover, unleavened bread, and consecration of firstborn, they all go back to the Exodus is the big point. And so you've got the whole calendar is going to be based on this. Aviv is supposed to be the first month of the year because of Passover. Whether or not that's still observed today, we'll set that aside perhaps for right now. But you have the description, and I just want to talk about, like you were saying, this teaching thing. You shall tell your son on that day, it's because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And isn't that just so interesting? It's put in that first person singular term. It's like, Dad, what are you doing? Like, hey, Dad, why are you doing it like that? Right? Because he's watching you do it. And you're saying, son, I am doing this because God saved me, because of what God did for me and what he has shown me. And when you have that language in verse 9, a memorial between your eyes, right, sign in your hand, and that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth, it's this idea. Ritual is so important because it's the way that every part of the body is connected and involved in participating with this. It's not just an idea that you have one day or a movie that you watch, but your hands and your feet and your eyes, they're all engaged in participating in the same way that the hands and the feet and the eyes of the people themselves were participating when they saw the Egyptians and when they walked across the sea and then they clapped their hands and the rest. But yeah, what else do you take from this? I mean, like a lot of this chapter is focused on this teaching aspect. So you've got the teaching here in this point, and then a little bit later on, just more about the teaching and the questions and answers. I mentioned the catechism, but so what do you think about some of this whole teaching and the questions, and for the kind of one generation to the next? Yeah. Yeah, that's really insightful. That it's not denying the importance of place and the idea of us all gathering together, right, in one place as the people of God. That's totally maintained, but you have this other aspect that's, I mean, it's so household, right? It's like the little bit of this, the prefiguring of like the house churches, which are going to be all over the early church when the church is just starting out. In the wake of Pentecost. And of course, that was a reality I think that we all were kind of reacquainted with a little bit. when COVID happened, and it was sort of like, we were kind of doing the house church thing a little bit here. Just really important how you have both aspects, right? And that's actually a big part of Luther's small catechism. And in fact, actually, it's really cool, actually. This isn't a commercial. I didn't get any commission for this. But, right, if you're on the Facebook stream, you can actually see I've got these posters here. And these are really cool posters that are put out by CPH for the catechism. And it's there on the actual poster, the words of the catechism. And if you look at the first words on all these pages, it says that as a father should teach his household in a simple way. So there's this idea that it wasn't like we just reinvented it or something with COVID, but there's this idea that every house is observing worship. Every house is involved in actually this sacrifice even. I just wanted to, by the way, pass along a little piece of information here. You might not be able to get through on the phones. The International Center might be having an issue with the phones. So if you do have any questions or comments and want to join the conversation, just stick with Facebook or email. So again, facebook.com/HAEspinosa, and also email KFUO@kfuo.org. So we still probably have time for maybe a question or so if you do want to chime in. But so it's really interesting though if you go down, right, because Pastor Andrus was mentioning the word sacrifice, which by the way, this is a little bit why I'm not letting Pastor Andrus get a word in, because we actually lost him over the phone. But Lord willing, we'll get him back. But so if you go down to what it says there, it's towards the end of the speaking part. So it's around verse 20, actually a little bit before that. So it's there there it is here. Yep. It's there in verse 15. Very interesting. This is the father speaking to his son. And what does he say? Therefore, I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. And that's pretty interesting, right? It's like, you almost, to kind of go back to that image of Passover in modern Israel, right? It's like the son is like watching his father slaughter this animal. And the son's like, why are you doing that, Dad? And I mean, and it's like, hey, son, it's actually for this very specific reason. It's really interesting that then the firstborn of all the animal sacrifices, think about that. All of those firstborn animal sacrifices that are not going to be going on just on Passover, but all the time, right? Maybe even weekly, are all connected back there to this event, to Exodus, to Passover. Because that's what we saw. We saw it actually at the very beginning, here in chapter 13, that it's when we're talking about man and beast, right? And so in chapter 12 earlier, God struck down the firstborn of all in Egypt who did not have the blood over the door, both man and beast. We saw that in the hailstorm, that the hail came down and it struck both man and beast. And so similarly, it was back with the boils that we saw that the boils came down like dust after they threw it up from the kiln, right? Man and beast. And then also, I think it was with the gnats or the lice, as it's sometimes translated, were all over man and beast. And you had this refrain, man and beast, man and beast. And so, so there it is, right? God did all this stuff to man and beast, and so therefore, man and beast need to be sacrificed or redeemed among these firstborn. And of course, that really fully connect the dots goes back to Genesis. When what happened on the sixth day? Well, God created land creatures, both man and beast. So, that way of just, why you do this? Why are you sacrificing all these animals, right? Like, why does that, and then sometimes I think we do that a little bit as Christians, and we look back and it's like, it's a very bloody affair, and we have a hymn even that's sort of like, not all the beasts, on Jewish altars slain, which is probably an unfortunate wording sometimes that we're left with. Might kind of miss the idea there. It's not like it was a bad thing, and in a sense it was a very good thing, because it was pointing back to God's sovereignty, and hey, yeah, he's the one who made both man and animal. and that's why it's this lived out, constant activity. I mean, because think about it. I mean, you're not even in biblical times, guys. I know you think like, oh, they had gigantic families. Well, they weren't having a kid every week, right? But I mean, if you had a number of animals like some flocks, you were kind of actually having your livestock give birth rather frequently. So, I mean, actually by having all that animal involvement stuff for this society, it was a way that they could actually be involved weekly, regularly in worship and participating in this lived out way of participating in the Passover. So, really good stuff that we shouldn't minimize. All right, well, just a few minutes left here. So what do we then make of the next part here that talks about the cloud and the fire? So this is really cool, and we see this in Numbers, right? And we see it, just going forward here. This is how God is leading them forth, and we're gonna see this. But I think the big thing, right, to think about with this whole like this cloud and this fire, this is the light and the darkness, right? This is the light and the darkness, and this is really cool, because if you understand that the Red Sea and everything leading up to the Red Sea, like we're going to talk about in chapter 14, is really belonging to the plague sequence, the wonder sequence in Egypt, right? That these last three events, the slaughter of the firstborn, before that the darkness, right, and now the Red Sea, the light and darkness thing is going on in a big way in these last three, which is really cool, because what's it do? It completes a sequence. Namely, what are the 5 things that God, in the week of creation, Genesis 1, that God names, right? There are 5 of them. 5 things that he names, and it's not coincidence at all. He names first day, and then night, and then heavens, and then earth, and then seas. 5. Why those 5? Well, this is like, I'm just not even making this up. Those were the big 5, the most prominent gods in the Egyptian pantheon. And for that matter, they were usually, in fact, the big 5 gods in most polytheistic pantheons, right? Like just day and night, land, sky, and sea. Like you always have those things. And so what we had in the sequence of plagues really was all building up to that. And we had our water plagues with the frogs and the fish, right? There at the end we had our land plagues, where you had the land being struck down, the vegetation devoured by locusts. There in the middle we had what you might call our sky or our heavens plagues. The idea being that when you have illnesses and epidemics and boils, right, things like that, those are things they're called disasters, things that are in the heavens, right? We can talk more about that, but then this completes the sequence, because now we got the light and the darkness. It's God, the Creator. That's why it's happening. It's pointing the way to what He does. So good to be talking to you guys about this awesome chapter. Moving on to Exodus chapter 13 next time. Until then, everybody, I'm Pastor A.J. Espinosa. Peace. Oh, I probably misspoke there. It was, no, you're right. It's 14 next time. It's been a week. Yeah. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. Well, anyway, I hope everything gets sorted out over there at the IC. I need to actually let you go here, because I need to get out of the get off the microphone here really quick. I'm sharing an office, but anyways, thank you, Stephanie. Have a good weekend. All right, yeah, will do. Bye. Okie doke. Okay, yeah, good stuff, everybody. If you have any follow-up questions, just post them on Facebook. I'll hopefully have a chance to answer some of them. Peace.